welcome back to the Forge Alliance for Retard series with your host Nibolowski, bringing you a new kind of video. Forge Alliance for me was one of the hardest games to learn, and for any new player it is quite a daunting RTS to play with, especially in comparison to some other RTSs on the market. So today I am going to be trying my very best to give out some hints to those new players. So begin Nibolowski's 10 tips to help new players. Alright, let's begin. My very first tip is expansion. One of the first things I noticed when starting to play Supreme Commander is that new players generally sit in their bases. This is not a good thing to do. Very short tip, but a very important one. You must expand and defend your mass extractors. Expanding and getting mass extractors may give you that cutting edge in battle later on in the game. What it will also provide you is the extra resources to be able to tech more efficiently and quicker. So don't forget, always expand as quickly as possible. My second tip is Tech 1 units. The biggest temptation when playing Supreme Commander is to get out of the Tech 1 phase as soon as possible. What I see a lot of new players doing is that they're not interested in Tech 1 units. But Tech 1 units are absolutely essential, and they are the backbone of your forces. From the very beginning of the game, you need to get a good mesh of Tech 1 forces on the ground as soon as possible. Also, don't just build tanks, you also need to start building Tech 1 artillery as well as anti-air. What this will do is it'll give you a good combination of forces to push forward with, and the artillery especially will be able to take out things like point defense should you come across them on the way into the enemy base. Please don't forget, you can keep on using Tech 1 units all the way throughout the game. My third helpful hint is balance your economy. This for me is one of the hardest things to do in Supreme Commander. Balancing mass and energy is quite a complicated process, whereas energy is a little easier because you can build energy. But with mass, it's a very painful upgrading process. Don't make the mistake of not upgrading your mass extractors and just waiting for mass fabrication in Tech 2 and Tech 3. My best advice is gradually upgrade 1 or 2 mass extractors at a time. Make sure you balance your economy against the power, and bit by bit tech up throughout the game as you go. Remember, try and play around with it to suit your playing style until you finally reach the balance that you're looking for. Hint number 4 is intelligence. Intelligence is one of the most important parts of the game. If you were to not be able to see what is coming and attacking you, then you're not going to be able to anticipate what units to build, when, and where they're coming from. The radar system in the game is split into 3 techs, as with most units in the game, but for some reason it tends to be one of the most neglected buildings. If we look at Tech 1 for example, this will offer you the opportunity to see a very small radius, but enough to cover off Tech 1 units, especially land units coming in and attacking you. If we look at here on Setton's Clutch, it offers you that little bit of advantage to see when your opposition is going to push, and also might offer the opportunity to see, well, actually your opposition doesn't have any units to defend, so you might be able to push a little sooner than you thought. If we have a look now at a Tech 2 radar, we can see that the field of view is massively expanded. We can now see far greater view distances. Although the radar doesn't eradicate the fog of war, it does manage to give you that extra bit of intelligence. For me, Tech 2 radar is great for seeing bombing runs coming in and being able to anticipate and perhaps move commanders. What I have seen many times is a lack of Tech 2 radar. For example, a commander standing still in his base might not be able to dodge a volley of Corsair fire. So again, don't just sit there and rely on no intelligence or a Tech 1 radar. You desperately need to upgrade it to a Tech 2 at vaguely the same time that your factories go Tech 2. Also, what is important to note is the fact that all of these things require power, so make sure, especially, these radar stations have enough power to be able to be sustained, otherwise you might be caught out. The last radar system is the Tech 3, which is actually called the Omni Radar. The Tech 3 Omni Radar is an incredibly large field of view. This will be absolutely a total necessity as the game grows into the later parts. What it will also do is it will start detecting things like stealth units. An Omni Radar will afford you the ability to see pretty much anything that is coming at you. What it will also manage to do is give you that advantage as to where you need to plot your attack. At later stages in the game, you might find that areas of the map are pretty impassable due to point defense or a massive amount of air coverage in a certain area. With an Omni Radar, you might be able to find a hole inside of your opposition's defenses, and this is why it is so incredibly important to be able to see what is coming. Tip number 5 is tech gradually. This tip is fairly simple but must be remembered. I've seen many new players launch attacks only as Tech 1, then stopping, then waiting for a Tech 2 upgrade, then attacking, then stopping, then upgrading again to Tech 3, attacking, and then stopping for the final experimental push. You must make sure that upgrading is a continuous process throughout the game. A saying I've heard before is that tech beats numbers, and in my experience most battles are won by players who have managed to tech correctly despite having less on the field. If you're going to win, having a good combination of units will help, and make sure you're fighting your opponent with very similar tech. My 6th tip is know your faction, know your units. The first place you need to visit is the Supreme Commander Wikipedia page. This has an absolutely huge amount of information which will give you the sort of little tidbits about your faction's units that you may need to know. For the sake of this video, I've actually put together a few examples of units that you may not know have certain advantages over other units. The first 2 units I'd like to look at are the Tech 1 tank from Aeon, the Aurora, and the Tech 1 assault bot from Cybran. What you may not have realised is that the Aurora has a range bonus on pretty much all of its Tech 1 opposition. You need to realise that an Aurora you don't march into a field of units, so make sure you keep it at range and utilise it for its strengths. The second unit I've highlighted is the Cybran Loyalist, a Tech 3 assault bot. What you may not have realised about the Loyalist is that it has an anti-missile defense system, as you can see here. This is an absolutely great feature of this unit because it will stop some naval bombardment, and it will also be a very cost-effective way of getting tactical missile defense systems. Again, something you may not have known previously. Another unit in Cybran that was very good was the Tech 2 Destroyer, which is called the Salem class. The Salem class can sprout legs and go on land. It may not be the quickest of units, but it can pass over certain types of terrain, which may give your forces that extra push when trying to get through your enemy's lines. Some may say this is a little cheap tactic. I think it's a great one. It can often be used to really help your game progress. Another fact is that factions have slight differences in terms of stats. An example is the Aeon Obsidian tank. Although highly armoured, is actually worth double the amount of resources of, say, a Cybran Rhino. So something to be considered when playing both factions, maybe numbers against strength. Also, one of the parts of the game that new players absolutely love to use is the Tech 4 experimental bomber from Seraphim. The only thing I'd like to remind you of here is that the Seraphim bomber has a massive turning circle, so make sure that when you're striking you have enough space to be able to turn it without getting caught by return fire. As with the tanks, No, that not all experimentals are created equal. I often see new players marching Monkey Lords to take on other units such as the Galactic Colossus. You must know that there is a huge hit point difference between these two units. Although their weapons may be similar, you must understand that all different types of experimentals have different purposes. Another example of this is the UEF Fat Boy. Do not march Fat Boys into battle. They are bombardment units. Keep them behind lines and wear down your opponent slowly. Also, what is fairly underutilized are things like the Percival and the Cybran Brick. These units are experimental killers. They are incredibly useful, and sometimes more useful than an experimental itself. What I find a lot of new players tend to do is they think the experimentals are the be-alls and end-alls of the game. They aren't. Have a look into using UEF Percivals and Cybran Bricks, and you can often find that a few of them, say 10 to 15, are more than enough to take out an experimental. Also, as a side note, as you can see in the video, the Ythota from Seraphon, also when it dies, actually gives out an ion field. What this does is it attacks all units in its range. A helpful hint might be considered that if your Ythota is near death, and it's near the enemy base, march it directly into the centre. This will cause absolute chaos inside of the base itself, and cause incredible amounts of damage to your opponent's units. Handy hint, good to use. Tip number 7 is Reclaim. Reclaim is absolutely vital at the start of a game especially. I have to say, I probably spent an entire year to a year and a half not reclaiming in Forged Alliance. I didn't think it was really worth it, and I thought it was a lot of hassle and time. However, Reclaim at the start can grab you that vital mass and energy that will help you slowly but surely upgrade your mass extractors. What you can see here is one player managing to have a selection of engineering units merely sitting there and reclaiming everything around them. What a lot of new players find is that they reclaim by manually selecting each and every tree or rock in the area. This is not the most efficient way to reclaim. To free up your hands to reclaim, you might want to try and set your units on a patrol path. I'm going to show you how to do that now, as it's incredibly straightforward and simple, and it will save you time at the start of a match. First of all, what you need to do is select your engineer unit. Put simply, you need to then put the patrol path inside of the reclaim area, and the engineer will automatically start reclaiming. You can leave it to do its thing until the entire area has been taken and reclaimed. I cannot emphasize this enough. Make sure that at least 10 to 15 Tech 1 units are reclaiming at the start. Tip number 8 is don't neglect one part of your forces. And by this, I mean Navy, Air and Land. More often than not, I find that new players really love to stick on the land. They can't be bothered with the hassle of air. It's quite a confusing part of the game. You cannot do this, especially on maps with water. You need to be able to have a balance of all three different types of forces. I know for many of you this seems like a very obvious point, but I do tend to see new players, especially joining games, asking whether they can have land only. Try and master utilising all three different types of forces. Once you've done this and you've balanced each of them, you'll be able to find that you can defend pretty much anything on the map. Tip number 9 is don't experimental rush, especially in team games. This is actually a bit of a pet peeve of mine, and I really want to help new players realise experimentals are awesome. They are one of the coolest parts of the game, but you need to realise more often than not an experimental is used only as part of the game, not to completely end it. In a team game, you need to support other players, and by sitting at the back and waiting and economizing and sending experimentals out, you're not really helping your teammates, because by the time the experimental is ready, your team are already at a disadvantage because you've not been helping them through the tech phases. Remember, experimentals are used to aid the game, not always to win it. So you can see here, this is a video I took of a huge experimental battle. I'd imagine most new players really want to see this. I'm afraid to say, guys, you're never going to. Not in any real competitive game. So remember, don't experimental rush. My last tip is attack when you can, but know when to retreat. When I started playing Supreme Commander, I introduced a lot of my friends to the game. What they did was, they had more units or an advantage over me, but they didn't attack. They were scared because they didn't know what was out there. Try and attack more often than not. However, know also when to retreat. If your commander is surrounded, put him in the water. If any of your units seem to be in danger or losing a battle, bring them back. It is better to have them alive than sacrificing them in a blaze of glory. Well, that wraps up my 10 tips for new players. Thank you very much for watching my video. If you found this useful, please like and subscribe. If this is a popular video, I'll be sure to try and put up some top 10 tips videos or even top 10 units. Until then, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.